All right, so now everybody can hear us. They missed that entire intro, unfortunately. All right, so tonight I'm going to be talking a little bit about Docker Compose, but first I want to ask, how many of you are familiar with Docker? All right, now is that a familiar, I've heard of Docker, or I've been using Docker and it's really awesome? Sort of like, okay, let's do this. Raise your hand if you've heard of Docker. Now, lower your hand, keep your hands raised if you're using Docker just on an ongoing basis. More hands got raised. That was really weird. Means you're using Docker and haven't heard of it before. So, all right. So, a short little while ago, I was working on trying to create this private server for a game that I had found. It's called Screeps. And this is a game where it's like an MMO RPG. And you play it by programming JavaScript. And then that causes all your units to move and everything else. But I noticed that you could create your own private server so you could run that on your own computer. The thing that caused me to sort of go into convulsions was that they used their own homemade JSON database. That I didn't get enough of shivers of horror there. But as you can imagine, it basically corrupts itself and causes it to crash after a couple of days because it's, well, a homemade JSON database. But somebody made a Mungo add-on where you can put that in there, and suddenly now you have a real database, and everything is going really awesome for that. So, bring up the chat over there. Too quiet. Okay, let me try to reposition this mic. How am I sounding in the back? All right, I'll try to keep this close to the mic then. So to begin with, I want to show you, this is the Screeps repo that allows us to get a server. And it's as simple as downloading Screeps, initting, and starting. And everything just sort of seems to work from there. Now this mod, you need to install the Screeps server, install this mod into a special area inside of the server, also install Redis, have that all working, know what the IP address is of the Redis server and the Mongo server, create some files, and then start up the server, and everything should be fine at that point. So the first step that I needed to do was create a Docker file to set up my Screeps server on its own. So I've already done that because if I try to do both, it's going to be way too long. So if let's go to vim Docker file. What I have here is I also always put all my stuff in from a user. So I never just run things as root inside of the containers in case for some reason they break out. They're then as this specific user, which is slightly better security-wise. But I create a home directory for this. You need an API key from Steam, and I created a really fake one for this one, which apparently still works. It doesn't break the system. But you need to replace this with a real API key to actually get it to work for real. I have this file, Mongo Redis config. If we take a look at what this is, it's really just telling it what the IP addresses of Mongo and Redis are going to be. And then after I init the server, I add this in to the container, or the image really, and I then use cat to sort of bring this over and add it to the RC file that the server creates. So this is sort of, it's a really hacky way to get things running inside of the Docker file because it kind of relies upon everything just working perfectly, but I couldn't figure out a way to dynamically do this without using the horrible save image method where I just manually create it inside of a Docker file and then diff it, which I didn't want to do. Now I have tested this a Docker file, and it does consistently work. So I am happy about that part, even though this kind of cat mongo redis.config into the scripts RC is a little bit weird and odd. But first I want to ask, any questions about the Docker file that we're using here?
What's
Yes. Is what?
Is this file available online?
Is this file available online? I will make sure that it gets onto line, and I'll post the link to it in the Meetup chat.
What is NPX?
NPX is a command from Node. It allows us to execute a command, and it finds where it is. So in this case, it will find it within a local directory and then execute it. Going once, going twice. All right. So we have also, like, there's little things that we need, like this mods.json, but that's all stuff just to really get things working. Now, Docker Compose. How many of you have used Docker Compose? All right, a small handful. Docker Compose, I'm really sad to say, is not, at least on Linux, just magically installed when you install Docker. I had to go install it separately to get well, the wonder of Docker Compose. And it is really good to work with. I don't like spinning up multi-container things because there's so many commands you have to run. Docker Compose does it all for you really easily once you set up the configuration file. All right, as you can see, we have the chat over here on the right too. People will be asking questions, and I'll have times where I'll ask questions also. I'll answer from there as well. So let's go ahead and start creating a Docker Compose file. So vim docker compose.yml. I have not yet found if you can just write JSON files and have that working. It seems that you have to write YAML for Docker Compose. So if you hate that, I'm sorry.
You should be able to write JSON. JSON's a subset.
One would think that, but I haven't found a way to tell Docker Compose to just ignore, like go straight to the JSON. It wants to convert it on its own. So what do I have? Version. I have a snippet here that sort of sets up a lot of things for me. So version 3 here. There are 3 different versions of Docker Compose that have come out over the years. When I first saw it, it was version 1, and it caused me not to look at it for a year or more. Version 3 is things are looking really nice right now. Inside of these services here, this is where we get to create and tell it what containers we're going to be creating in our entire ecosystem. And this name here is going to be, okay, well, this is the name of the service. So I might call this one Screeps, because that's the name of my Screeps container. And build, I get to tell it where is the Docker file for it. It will auto build this into an image for me. Then I can tell it, okay, ports. What ports do I want to have exposed to the world? Well, this is, I always forget what these are, but that's the reason why I came here to take a look. I need port 21025. So 21025, 21025. And then we get to tell Docker Compose what network do we want to create and put this one inside. We can create multiple networks here and have a complicated, network ecosystem. I'm not going to need that. I just want my Screeps, Mongo, and Redis all on the same network so they can talk to each other. So this is the name of the network. Let's just, I could call them all Screeps because it's going to namespace them correctly. I'll call this my network to show that it's different. Now, if I create my network there, I have to come down to here to networks and change it here too. And the reason is because down here I'm describing, here's what the networks are going to be that I'm using, and here is this container will be attached to this network. And then I get to say, okay, well, what does this container depend upon? Does it need other containers to be created first for me? So in this case, I know I'm going to create something called Mungo, and I'm also going to create, I need to have Redis. So this way, those ones will be created first, and it won't attempt to use them because my scripts container won't even be active by the time they finish. And that's how we set up an entire container system all on its own. The rest of the time is just going to be, okay, well, now let's create the other ones, specifically Mongo and Redis. Now, these are images I'm going to pull from Docker Hub, so I don't need to build them out. I don't need to give them a Docker file. So we'll call this Mongo. Because we have that depends on, the order that I put them in this file does not matter at all. So image, Mongo, and let's do latest. Network, well, I want to put it on my network. And here's where I get to put a volume container in, a Docker volume. How many of you are familiar with Docker volumes for data? All right, just a few of you, so I'm going to explain really quickly. A Docker volume allows us to store data, but not inside of the container that we're putting in. So by default, Mongo likes to store its data in /data/db, which is great, but if we, for some reason, want to play around with, a new version of Mongo comes out and I want to rebuild this entire ecosystem or this specific container, all that data is lost. My entire world and me taking over the world, completely gone. But if I use a volume, I can store that data inside of the volume stays there. It's still sort of like a Docker container, but its only job is to store data. And it mounts into a directory inside of my container. So for this volume, I named the volume, so I'm going to call this DB. And the target is /data/db. Now I've just memorized that. It's a really good idea to go and look at the documentation for where they're storing your data. Of course, I have to come back down here to volumes and say that I want the DB volume. Now you'll notice that I'm putting colons at the end of these down here. That's because they are objects. I just don't have any keys or values inside of them because I'm using the default values. I can override them and do some interesting things, but in this case, I don't really need anything like that. I might need something for a network, so we'll see. Now, that's my Mongo. Let's go ahead and do this again for Redis. Redis, latest, networks, and I want my network and my volumes. I'll call this the Redis. And I think it's /data, but I'll show you where to go find where these things are, is hub.docker.com, which I go to all the time to sort of reference where things are. So I'm going to search for Redis. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Docker too much, or at least using Docker Hub, there are official Docker images and there's unofficial Docker images. And you can tell if they're official or not first by, you can come over here and sort by official, or if they're namespaced. So if I zoom in here, this first one here, Redis, that's official because it's just a single name. It's like a rock star. But these ones over here, they're namespaced with the username first, and that lets us know that it's just some person has created this image And we can download it and use it, but we also have to trust that, well, their Docker file is doing exactly what we want them to do. Hopefully they're not doing anything evil. But I trust the official ones, because they're supposed to be made by the actual teams, like the Redis team, or by the Docker Foundation themselves. So if I scroll down, eventually somewhere in here, they say where, here it is. If persistence is enabled, data is stored in a volume/data. So I'll come back to my code and Redis/data. So that's where I'm going to put my volume container. And what else do I need on? I don't think I need anything else on here. So yes, let me save really quickly because that would be sad if I didn't save. All right, let's do questions here and then also take questions on the stream. Yes?
When you Redis /share, is
The question is, when I put this Redis with the :/data, is it going into a directory inside the container? And the answer is yes. It's being mounted right here in this /data.
So what is the difference between the volumes object there, like the ASCII one, and the one at the top one?
Like this one right here?
Like you have one under Mongo, one under Redis, those are the ASCII ones, and then one at the top one under yeah.
Oh, line 28? Oh, so these are defining what volumes I'm going to be using. So I have to put in here Redis. But, so these ones are saying, okay, I'm going to have this volume here, and this is where it's going to be mounted, on. And this is just saying, hey, I'm going to have these volumes available to me. It's a little bit weird. It's the weirdness of Docker Compose, because I can't just use them and have them created as soon as they're used. I have to tell them I want them. Sort of like a variable creation.
Are there bounds on size? Like when you get a volume, is it just auto size?
So in this case, there's no bounds in volume. I'm not setting that. It is possible to put in, to say like, okay, have size restrictions. I could do networks where it's like have this speed of network, or only be able to go to these DNS locations.
But that can fill up the nodes. Yes, basically.
Oh yeah, like because these Docker volumes are actually mounted to my disk. And if we come, if I create a new Docker volume here, so sudo docker volumes, it's volume ls. I don't have any volumes right now, but I could create my own. So I think it's create, and then just do test. Well, I have this test, and I think it's sudo docker inspect test, and it shows me that its mount point here on my local system is at /var live docker volumes test _ data. So this data is going to be stored on my disk drive somewhere. It's just not going to be in an easy to find location, but if I need to back it up for some reason, this is how I find out where to go and do that backup. Okay, so this seems like it should work, but if you remember that I need to have a static IP address to know what Mongo and Redis is going to be, so that way the script actually tells it to be the appropriate thing. Now I can just hope. Oh, and I forgot. I was going to answer questions from the stream too. First is Techie Tech is Compose an add-on to Docker or another flavor. It is an add-on. It's an official thing from Docker, and you download it from the Docker store. It's just a separate download. You can try to use FPM to convert the NPM of scripts into an NPM or deb. And then just sending me where I could do that. All right. Yes?
So on Windows and Macintosh, that's built in Docker Compose and Docker Stats as well.
Oh, is it built in?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was a comment saying that in Windows and in Mac, Docker Compose comes for free when you install Docker, which is nice. I'm running on Ubuntu here, so when I installed it, I did not get it at all, and I had to go and find it myself. Which means that if you're going to run this on a server, you're most likely going to be running Linux, and you're going to have to go find and install it there. Okay, so let's go investigate this networks and figure out a way to give ourselves an IP address here. And this is where the Docker Compose, let me come up to the home here. The reference for Docker Compose is actually really nice. They have every command you could possibly want to put into this file. Probably more than you're normally, its reading time here is 60 minutes. It's a very long file. Also, I wouldn't recommend just casually reading it. And if I look at, just do a search for something like IP, there's a ton of IP addresses. And it's always tough to find exactly where it is. I had it early loaded up, but then I accidentally pressed like page up 15 times and lost it. So if we search for network, so there's network mode, and this is where we can say, okay, we don't, by default, network is going to give us a bridge mode, but we want to be able to specific, here it is, IP4 addresses. You can also assign IP6 addresses inside your container if you, want to join the future, whenever that happens. Okay, so we can actually set manual IPv4 addresses inside of the network and just hand it what IP address it needs to be. So in this case, inside of the app service, networks, the app, the network, IPv4 address, and then the specific address. So I'm going to open that over here on my phone so that I can easily reference that while going full screen over here. So inside of my network, I'm going to have IPv4 address, and then whatever the address I want to be. So in this case, it's 172 for the, that's the Redis one. I want the Mungo one is 172.20.0.3. And I like to do this and manually set these because I don't trust that it's going to give these the correct order and always give the same one over and over again, even though probably it would. And I need to do this exact same thing over here on the Redis network. So IPv4 address 172.20.0.2. Now, that's not all, because we can't just say this is what the address you're going to get. Inside of the networks, this is where we're going to give it a little bit of custom configuration here. This is the reason why they're objects. So we're going to have to say that we have to now say it's a bridge driver and then IPAM so that we can now configure the subnets. And we can configure the subnet and get as crazy as we want, but I think a /24 is perfectly fine here. All right, so inside of networks here, I want to have driver, bridge, and then there's this IPAM, and inside of IPAM, I'm going to have another driver, and this is just the default, and then config. Again, this is the part where if you really hate YAML, I'm sorry, and then we give it the subnet, and what's the subnet we want to be on? 172.20.0.0/24. All right, so if I've coded this correctly, we're good and it will work. Question?
Under the network part for Redis and Mungo,
Yeah.
there was a sub tag on the
help docs, can you skip levels, or do you have to include that appnet?
Let's see, appnet. So if we take a look here, we have networks, appnet, and then an IP4 address. If we come back to this one, we have networks, and then my network is the name of the network. That's the reason I'm trying to like name this specifically my network, because this one, I agree, it kind of looks like it's an official thing from Docker and not the name of the network that they're making us use. So naming things, I mean, decently important, but also kind of difficult to tell from the documentation itself. Question?
Yeah. So I have like a Docker YML file that I've been using Docker for a while. I don't understand it, but I noticed that I have ports defined, like a 40,000 for example, but I don't have any networks defined.
You get the screen.
I'm wondering how I'm still able to access that from 48,000 if I've never defined a network.
Okay, so let me repeat just to make sure I understand you. It's something like this port, right? Like, how does my host system understand that this port is what's being exposed to the internal container, right?
Yes, but without a defined network inside there.
Without a defined network. Okay. All right. So this port is mapping a port from your host system to the container itself. So on my computer, it's 21025, and that's what I'll use over here. Now I could say, 80 for some, if I wanted to, and now I could just go to my web browser and do that. And how many of you are feeling really cold? I'm wondering if we should. Yeah, it's starting to rain outside for those of you on the stream. I'm going to undo this. And then this one on the right is the port inside of the container. So this is separate from the networks here, which are basically a network that is in between. I wish I had like a Wacom tablet so I can draw a network map out here, but we can imagine that we have a server, like a web server, that we're connecting to from the outside. And it itself is networked with other computers, but we can't see that. We can only see the published host. You'll notice also that I don't have to do ports on Redis or Mungo, even though they specifically need you to listen on certain ports. And that's because they're only broadcasting on this network, so they're hidden from the outside world. So it's...
I think he was asking more about the default network.
Also, a little bit both, but yeah.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah,
The default network, you don't specify it's a published network.
Yeah, it's like basically all your containers sort of kind of go onto it, but they're also not really available to each other either.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't make that connection that was like an internal network. I thought that was the bridge to.
yes. Yes. Question.
So when do we want to explicitly define the network instead of using it?
So I like to define the network if I want to isolate them into that network. So if I'm going to create like another entire project where I'm working on, I do not want them to touch to this project if I have it running in the background. And inside of that network, they could still be 172.20.02 because they're as if their own systems. They never see each other. It makes it really nice. All right, let's actually run this and see if I've got it running correctly. So sudo docker -compose, and then to build and like set up, it's just build. But unlike normal Docker build, I don't have to do the -t and give it a name. It's going to name it for me because it's Docker compose. So let's get this started because it'll take a while. I've got a lot of rules in that Docker file. You'll notice that right away it says, oh, Redis is using an image, skipping. Mongo is using an image, skipping. It's not going to be part of this build phase. That'll only come in when I start bringing it up. And right now I have it, it's going to be doing some apt gets to install certain things that I need inside of those containers to be able to install the server and get everything running. So those always take a little bit of time. So perfect time for more questions if there are any.
Back to the network thing, if you have a default network, like no specification, and a network, they're not visible to each other, right? Was the punchline of that?
Yes, so the question was, if I have a default network, if I just use a default network on one container, and I have a specific network for another container, will they be able to see each other? And the answer is no. They'll be isolated from each other.
Expose both to the world being your node to do it.
Right, I can still expose the ports. Now, if I expose the same port, your computer won't like that because it can't have two services like trying to attach the same port. Yes?
So what is it doing right after Redis that's not letting you for Redis and Mongo?
So what it's having to do here is it's running this Docker file that I have. So what that means is it's like installing it has to install, well, I'm using the Node-based image, so it already has Node installed. But I need to install a few other things from apt-get in order to install scripts and install the Mongo. Like I have to get Mongo, well, not Mongo itself, I have to get some of its prerequisites going in there. And you'll notice that I'm doing things like running npm init.y in order to get a package.json in there for use to install other npm packages inside of scripts. And it's done. So for those of you who are new to Docker, all of these steps are being cached. So the next time I use this, it'll be super, super, super fast. But it was 19 lines in my Docker file, and it completed that pretty quickly and built an entire operating system with software for me to use. Now, this isn't running yet, but question?
What would be the difference? Like if you did Docker compose up and use the same YAML, does it do the build and then fire it up, or?
Good question. So the question is, if I just did skip straight to Docker compose up, would it still build this for me? And the answer is no. It needs to build first, and then you can do up. So up just brings up the server. I believe there is a subcommand where you can say, oh, rebuild if it hasn't been built before, but I generally don't do that. I like to just build on my own. So I can now do Docker compose up, and let's bring this up and see if it works. So hit return, and we'll see, okay, well, that was really fast. See if I can come back here and take a look at what we've got. It did a lot of things out to the screen really quickly. The first thing that it did was it created those networks. This is a lot of output. I haven't actually looked how many pages this is. So it creates the Mongo because it requires that first. Here it is. Creates the network, creates the volumes, brings up Redis, brings up Mongo, then brings up scripts. And then I'm now attached to the screen, so I get all the log output right here. Now, at this point, I might want to go inside of it and run a command inside of one of the containers just to see if it's working. So I'm going to do Control-C to bring it down because I don't want it just running on my system. So next I'm going to Docker compose start it, which takes a started one that stopped and starts it in daemon mode. So Docker compose start. I could have done Docker sudo Docker compose up -d for daemon mode right away, but this now gives me my terminal back, and I can run a command, a one-off command inside of a container with the exec command. So sudo Docker compose exec, the name of the container I want to use. So in this case, I want Mongo to take a look at the database, make sure that things are running in there. And the command I want, well, in this case, I want an interactive command. So I'm just going to say /bin/bash. And now I'm inside of the container, even though it's up and running. So this is super helpful for going in and actually taking a look at whatever's in that container and see what's going on. So in this case, I now want to run Mongo. I've connected the database, show DBS. There's scripts, use scripts, show collections, All right, let's do db.users.find.pretty. And this is Screeps not using a JSON homemade database, but rather a Mongo database instead. And I didn't have to do any craziness. It just started working because I set all this up with Docker Compose. I can now put this onto a server, have it listening, open up that one port in a firewall, and run this with all my friends. So that's pretty much my talk for Docker Compose. Any other, all right, question?
Question about that last part, when you go to deploy, right? So
Yes.
Do you upload the compose file out to an image repository, or do you have to do each of your separate, Docker files? What's the process to put this on another server?
So definitely need the Docker Compose file in order to do the commands docker up, docker build, docker start. What I don't necessarily need is the Docker file and everything else, because what I could do is publish the image to Docker Hub and then just tell it, oh, just use this from Docker Hub. And then when I build it, it'll say, oh, everything's already set, we're ready to go, and then just Docker start, and everything's good to go. But if you do that and you have an API key like I had here, you just published your API key to a public, image. Not the best of ideas. So you could use this as exec to go in and just update the API key later if you wanted to do it that way. Any other questions? Let's go this way first. So.
I do want to talk all about the layered file system or anything like that.
Oh, okay, so like the layered file system. So if we, one of the interesting things about Docker is that it's sort of like GitHub, where it's storing the changes since the last image that was created. So my image that I created here for Screeps is built upon a previous image that was, that has Node in it, which itself is built upon Ubuntu, which is built upon something else. And each one of those are saved, but only the changes since then. So think of it like GitHub, except for entire operating systems. So really cool, and it makes it super fast. And I can have multiple operating systems on my computer and not take all of the space up. All right, so I think there was, yes?
Are you familiar with the run command supposed to exec?
The run command?
Yeah.
So if I try the run command, what I have found, because I kept on trying to do run initially when I learned it, like if I come up here, if I change this to run, I get an error, which it says, hey, I can't start the service Mungo, address already in use. So exec will execute a command inside of an already running container, while run spins up the container to run it.
I see. Okay, yeah, because the docs that I was going through, these are old, but it says like just run --rm, and then your command. So I'm not sure if that.
Is that for just Docker, not Docker Compose?
No, this is not.
Okay. I think it does very similar things, except because I have it be a static IP address, both of them now try to use the same IP address, and not cool.
That might be why mine's different, because I don't have that networks.
Yep. All right. I thought there was, yes.
Yeah, so my question is like in general, not for a Docker Compose, the regular Docker. So I've experienced that when I execute a command and enter into a bash, and then when I exit, I see that Docker PS shows that the container has exited a few seconds ago.
Oh, like on so if you use something like, I'm out here in a normal desktop, if I do sudo docker run -it ubuntu /bin/bash, or even just on its own, and I hit it like this, and these download because I don't have Ubuntu latest, oops. And then what happens is you go and take a look at Docker PS to see what was running. It's like, oh, it exited out a couple seconds ago. The key is that, oh, this dropped me inside. If I exit this and now do sudo docker ps-a, we'll see, oh, I have so many of these now. Docker, here's this Ubuntu one, exited 5 seconds ago. That's because whatever command you run didn't like stay alive forever. So if it's a command that never exits, as long as you're in daemon mode or interactive TTY mode, it'll stay up.
Unless it exits.
Unless it exits.
Or if the process finishes.
If the
Say
process
you-
crashes,
If you say, I want to run sleep 2 seconds, the sleep exits after 2 seconds, and then the container goes down also.
right, exactly.
So like if I just supply dash d flag, and then if I enter into the bash and then exit, it should always run, right?
Only if
Well,
the command
When
inside
you exit out of
runs.
bash, you're stopping the PID1 process, which is the bash. So if your bash exits, the container goes down. So if you wanted to keep it up, you have to do something that stays running. So if you were to, let's say, Nginx in non-daemon mode, you could run that by saying run Nginx, and then you have to stop it from the outside.
So I think this is an excellent thing. Come talk to me afterwards. I'll be happy to chat with you about that. Any other questions? Michael?
Why are you using pseudo?
Why am I using sudo? So on, I don't know about Windows, but on Macs, when you install Docker, it just installs sort of as you, and then you could just run everything without sudo. On Linux, you install it with sudo, and then you need to use sudo forevermore. Now, you can do some trickery behind the scenes, so you don't need that. And I've read conflicting articles for like security purposes of why you might want to do that. The most recent one I've read states you want to use sudo so that not anybody who has access to the system can execute Docker containers, which by default allow you to run root things. And if that thing breaks out of the container as root, it can run stuff in your host system. Michael?
So when you're doing a Docker pull, is that pseudo?
When I'm doing Docker pull, yes, I'm doing sudo with that. I'm doing sudo with everything here. If you're on a Mac, you're not. All right, any last questions? All right, well, that was my talk, and I think we have a demo coming up for Yippee.io. And for the stream, that's going to be the end of it right now because we have to switch over to everybody else, and I don't have the ability to share that screen. So thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you guys next time.